Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. Today is just a short episode. I just want to talk about the Alabasta Saga and the arc and sort of give it a review of sorts. So, yeah, just a bit of an unscripted episode, really. First of all, the plot. I think this is definitely one of the better arcs or sagas in the entire run of One Piece so far. I mean, the plot is awesome. It's a sprawling epic about a band of pirates helping a princess fight back against an underground criminal organization that's plotting to take it over by inciting a civil war costing the lives of thousands. I mean, that right there is a pretty cool premise. But yeah, I think what's so good about this plot is that it keeps the tension up all the time while slowly introducing us to various elements that kind of builds up the overall plot. And so by the time you get to that climactic finale, it's just incredible because you've got all these small things that have built it up, all culminating into this big battle at the very end. I mean, going all the way back to Whiskey Peak to the end of Alabasta is just, you have all these different things that keep adding more and more layers to it and adding more and more stakes, as well as just our overall attachment to each character and each story beat and the villains themselves. It's really incredible how they seem to all work together. And then by the time it's over, there's just this incredible cathartic release when Luffy lands that Gomu Gomu no Storm and just punches Crocodile through the ground. It's freaking awesome. Not only that, but this entire story arc and saga really took some huge steps in terms of world building and just sort of explodes the world of One Piece. I mean, we get introduced to the Grand Line. Well, not introduced to it, but we are actually in the Grand Line and just see how vast and how varied and how dangerous this place can be, given all the hype that it was built up to in the East Blue saga. And then we get introduced to this sort of the navigation of Grand Line with the log posts and like filling up the logs, as well as all the different islands and like how the climate works in the Grand Line. And that's one of the things I really love about Oda and how that shines through the entire series is just those little small details of like, how do you get from one island to the next? What's the climate like? How are the different ecosystems affecting the other islands as well as anything nearby, like the waters near it? And yeah, just the amount of detail that goes into and how much thought goes into all of that is pretty incredible. And we saw a lot of that in the East Blue saga, but I think once they got to the Grand Line, we got to see way more different interpretations of what different islands could be, you know, from Whiskey Peak being this sort of like just this outpost town, and then you have Drum Island with the winter feel to it, then you have the jungles of Little Garden, and then finally we have the deserts of Alabasta. I mean, we went through a whole gambit of different environments. But not only that, but each island has their own sort of politics and sort of different economies and different cultures. Obviously, with Little Garden kind of being the exception to that, as there's no real government or economy or culture really. But I mean, you still have Dory and Broggy and their story as well. But yeah, similarly, we get introduced to a little bit more nuance to the Marines with the introduction of Tashigi, Smoker, kind of making bigger, not introductions, but sort of just being introduced to a more deeper side of Smoker and Tashigi, as well as being introduced to Hina, and sort of the mention of the world government and the sort of the overall leaders of the government, with Smoker mentioning those geezers, which we haven't met yet, but they'll probably play a bigger role, I'm assuming. And then we also get a lot bigger view of just the enormous power increase of the Grand Line. You know, we saw it with Mihawk in East Blue, and we got a taste of it, but now we're seeing all these different devil fruit powers and just what a Shichibukai like Crocodile could be, and then having to face someone that has a devil fruit like that, and then you'd have all these like varied devil fruit and abilities that you see throughout the entire series, and people using just sort of common fruits, I guess, in very unique ways as well. And you just see the sort of the power increase in the enemies that the Straw Hats have to face. You know, it's a stark contrast going from enemies like Don Krieg and Arlong to people like Mr. 2 and Mr. 1, as well as Crocodile, and seeing these different enemies, and Mr. 3 even, he was kind of a pushover, but at the same time, he incapacitated Zoro, Nami, and Vivi, and almost had Luffy too if it were not for Usopp. So you have all these different enemies, and it's, yeah, everything just expanded and amped up even more. And I think overall this arc is just fun. Like, each island is like distinct and really fun, and and it's really funny too. I think one of the highlights of this section of One Piece is just the comedy. It's just hilarious, all the way from the Twin Capes when they meet Laboon to Drum Island, and all the shenanigans that happens with the Lapon and with meeting Chopper, and then just the absurd comedy in Alabasta as well. This stretch of episodes in this whole saga is just full of comedy gold, and I think this is one of the few areas where we're, earlier on in One Piece, it strikes a pretty good balance of the comedy being really funny while also still maintaining that tension and that high octane action that the series is known for. Going forward, I guess comedy is still a very present thing in the story, but I do think that it kind of takes a backseat to the dramatic tension as well as the action. I think one of the most exciting aspects of this story arc and this saga is the setups, the things that aren't necessarily contained within the Alabasta Saga, but sort of like they have setups for bigger, wider stories that will have yet to be paid off, not for like thousands of chapters. Things like the Laboon, him and his reunion with the Straw Hats, as well as just the Shichibukai. We've now met 2 Shichibukai, and there are still 5 of these monsters still out there, and Luffy's defeated one of them. It's you still want to see what the other 5 are like. You have more nuanced takes of the Marines, as well as sort of their structure and the politics within the Marines, with that conversation with Hina and Smoker and their ideologies like sort of conflicting off of each other, and this whole theme of justice and strength, playing out. And then you have things like Elbaf. We get this sense that this is now Usopp's goal, to go to Elbaf and see the giant's home island, and this has now become kind of part of his dream. It has a much more concrete goal as opposed to when they first left. It was sort of the be a brave warrior of the sea, but now he's actually got some form of an actual destination that he needs to go to, and it's not so much more nebulous. And then the big ones, the story threads for the Will of D, and the fact that Gold Roger's name was Gold D Roger. He was a D like Luffy is. And what does that even mean? Like, what is the Will of D? What does that have to do with the fact that Gold Roger was a D? And that whole can of worms opening up, along with the poneglyphs and the real poneglyph, this concept of these mysterious stones holding history, as well as the ancient weapons, and this whole like history of One Piece is now being introduced too, that there's this world that's happened in the past that holds a key to the mystery of what's going on right now, and then incorporating Robin's dream into the fact that there is a section of the world's history that seems to be missing, and that is Robin's goal to find that out. And now we have this sort of bigger overarching story with her dream being fulfilled. And so, yeah, you just see all these really cool setups for story threads going forward within the Alabasta Saga as well. And then kind of just like looking at the sort of the overall tone and structure of One Piece, I feel like the Alabasta Saga really cemented that sort of tone and structure. It helped to establish various characters' personalities and traits, especially the Straw Hats. We've got the idea that Zoro is the super buff guy. Like, he is just overpowered strength, and but before Zoro is strong, but I think during the Alabasta Saga, we finally get this idea that Zoro is just like ungodly, like super strength, like physical brute strength. Then you establish the whole idea of Sanji being sort of the undercover and like this, the ace in the hole type character. And then obviously, we have Usopp being more of the support character. And then I like the fact that, yeah, Usopp and Nami are still the weaker characters, but they both establish like their own very unique fighting styles, especially with Nami. Before the Alabasta arc, not even the saga, but before the arc, before she gets the climb attack, you really didn't know how she would actually contribute in a fight, because up until now, all she does is wave her stick. And it was really cool to see that, okay, this is how Nami actually fights. She uses her brains and her knowledge, and she beats them using that knowledge. And it's really cool that Usopp is the sort of the enhancer that allows her to be that useful fighter, when previously, yeah, she really didn't do much when you really look at all the fights. I mean, she didn't even do any fighting in Arlong Park, clearly, and even in Little Garden and Drum, she was incapacitated in both arcs. And yeah, I really liked that we got to see a lot of the crew members grow in these varied and meaningful ways. I mean, mentally, emotionally, and physically. I mean, Luffy especially, he starts to learn what it means to be an actual leader. Like, up until now, he's just been kind of doing whatever he wants, but there are moments in this story where he actually is a leader, and he takes note of that, and that he has some responsibility. And I like seeing that growth in Luffy. And yeah, you just sort of see all of that grow throughout the episodes, especially in relation to Bibi. Seeing all the different characters play off of Bibi, and then with the introduction of Chopper being the youngest member of the crew, they all kind of take a sort of mentor role with him, with Luffy, and especially Usopp taking on sort of like this somewhat of like the mischievous older brother, while Zoro takes over that position of being the strong older brother type role. And so they both take Chopper under their wings, and it's fun to see that dynamic play out, as well as you get to see the deepening of rivalries between Zoro and Sanji. Obviously, you see them being more adversarial towards each other and having those little snippy one-liners back and forth. And those are really fun to see, as well as you see the deepening of the sort of roles that were established in the East Blue Saga, with Zoro taking on sort of that leadership role during like the intense combat moments, while Nami takes over the command of just making overall day-to-day decisions as well as logistics. And then you have sort of the fights. I think the fights are a bit hit or miss in this entire saga. Like well, pretty much everything before Alabasta kind of was lackluster. Whiskey Peak didn't really have a fight aside from fighting Mr. Five and Miss Valentine, but the Straw Hats are like so overpowered at that point that they don't even really register on Mr. Five and Miss Valentine's radar. And then, Little Garden was a little bit more entertaining, but more so because it was funny, not because the fights were epic. And I think, yeah, Luffy struggling with Miss Golden Week's colors trap was funny. That still cracks me up. And then, yeah, obviously the Drum Island fights were all really lackluster, as Wapol wasn't really much of a threat, and his powers weren't really used that effectively. And again, Luffy is just so overpowered compared to people like Wapol. There's really no tension. But man, it really makes up for it once you get to Alabasta. Like, the Alabasta fights are amazing. And again, we see sort of the growth and upgrade of what we saw in Arlong Park with the crew battles. And yeah, this is One Piece at its best, is when they have these sort of crew battles, seeing a crew against another crew and having these one-on-one fights. And that's really like one of the highlights of One Piece as a whole. And in terms of the entire series, is when you get these sort of moments. And unfortunately it's rare, but it's also good that it's rare, because if it happens too often, it loses that sort of the specialness of that. So seeing this on this scale, like the Arlong Park was awesome seeing that, but seeing that amped up like almost 10 times with the stakes, with the enemy power levels, and with just the brutality of each fight. I mean, each member just gets freaking brutalized when you look at it, like how much damage they take compared to the Arlong Park fights. And each one is so good. Like, each fight is really great on its own, and there are some memorable moments in all of the fights, whether it be Usopp's, you can't laugh at a Nakama's dream, whether it's Nami taking that spike to her foot and then firing the tornado tempo. Sanji doing the well, actually Sanji's entire fight is memorable, but the wall shot and just him trying to fight a Nami clone, and then obviously with Zoro's Shish Son Son, like his final attack, and then Luffy's fight against Crocodile. All three of them are memorable, and even though this is the first time we've seen Luffy lose, not just once, but he gets his ass handed to him twice, which is a crazy thing to see in a story like this, to see your hero just get totally decimated 2 times in a row. Obviously that build up though, oh man, by the time he finally gets Crocodile, that is freaking awesome. Just seeing the Gomu Gomu no Storm in that moment and the way that's handled in the anime is incredible, with the music and the animation. And the fights in Alabasta more than make up for the sort of lackluster of the earlier parts of the saga in the first 3 islands, I think. But I think overall though, if I was evaluating the fights as a whole, it is fairly hit or miss. And then finally, just sort of more logistical things. I think the saga overall in the anime, it's very light on the fillers, thankfully. There aren't very many fillers. There's just a few fillers in between the episodes, in between island arcs, but it's nothing too pervasive. And the animation is actually pretty good on the whole by One Piece standards. They're mostly pretty well animated, pretty decently paced. And there are a couple episodes that obviously look like they were rushed, and sort of the shading and the lighting and the modeling look a little lazy. But I think overall, when it counted, it really hit the mark. And obviously, there's that one initial punch on Crocodile that still bugs me, how cheap that looks. But beyond that, I mean, everything else looked pretty damn good. And so, on the whole, I would say the Alabasta Saga is really, really good. I mean, it's still one of my favorite sagas of the entire series. I think, it's probably maybe 3rd or even 2nd in terms of my favorite arcs or sagas in the entire story. That kind of depends on how the current arc, or the saga concludes, but I think it definitely deserves to be in the top 3 of my favorites for sure. We'll get to the other arcs when we get there, but I think Alabasta is really good, and it really cements One Piece as a series that should be watched. And if Arlong Park didn't hook you, getting through the Alabasta Saga, you're pretty much on board. I don't see how you can make it to this far into the series and not be like, I need to see more. And it's because so many things were done right during this saga. But those are my thoughts on the Alabasta Saga and the Alabasta arc. And I will be going on a sort of a mini summer break, I guess. I'm going to take a couple weeks off, so no episodes for, I'd say, about the next 2 weeks, but then I'll come back with an episode talking about the many, many filler episodes leading up to the next saga or the next arc. But I'll see you on that episode. But until then, thanks for listening, and if you enjoyed this, send me a like or a comment. If you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. You can check out my Instagram and Twitter account at SunnyGo Podcast for updates. And obviously no spoilers, so I'll see you on the next episode. Bye.